friends, Ann McKinnell here. I am in this beautiful area of the Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona, and I'm planning on doing some star trails tonight. So I thought this would be a perfect time to take you along with me and show you everything that I do to plan my star trail photographs. So we're going to be doing two things. We're going to be doing star trails and a star time lapse using the same set of photos. So the first thing I do when I'm thinking about doing star trails is I check to see what's going on with the moon. The moon can make or break your star trail photographs, so you need to do it on a dark night when the moon is not in the sky. So tonight I already checked and the moon's coming up at 1:30 in the morning. So we have about 4 hours to work with. I usually end up doing about 2 hours, and that gives enough to give a star trail motion. But if you want to do a time lapse, the longer is better, because with only 2 hours you'll get about maybe 5 seconds of time lapse. So if you can go longer, that's good. It is a little bit hard though, because then you have to choose at 1:30 in the morning if you're going to come out and get your camera gear or if you're just going to leave it out here all night. So I don't know, I'll probably set it up for 4 hours and then decide before I go to bed if I'm going to come back out for it or not. The other thing to watch out for is wind, because if it's very windy, your tripod might move a little bit and that's going to ruin the whole thing. So you can try to weigh it down, but it's best to just try and do it when it's not windy. So once you have the right day, then you need to think about your location. So I like to try and face north. It's your choice whether you want to do that. If you face north, you can get the North Star Polaris in the frame, and then your star trails will go around in a circle. But it's okay to not face north too, and your star trails might just go across, or they might go up. So that's just something to consider. If you want your star trails to go around in a circle and you're in the northern hemisphere, you want to try and get Polaris in the frame. So that's what I'm going to try and do. The other thing is to pick a foreground that has a really defined shape. So you think about something similar to what you would do with your silhouette images. You're going to want something that has a good shape, some nice foreground elements. So we're going to walk up this way. This is north over here, and I'm going to see if we can try to find ourselves a good composition. Looks like a really good spot over here. I like this because we have some really nice defined rock formations in the background to work with, and we have these nice cholla cactus in the foreground. So this is going to make a really interesting foreground. You can envision this with star trails going on above it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to put my camera down for a minute. I'm going to check something on my phone. So I have an app on my phone called Photo Pills, and I'll show you a close-up of that. You can go into Photo Pills and look at the night AR. And using a slider, you can change the time of day. And I'm going to just push this forward till about 9:30, and then you can hold it up in the sky and see where the North Star is going to be. So, or you can, go another way and see, if I face this way, the stars are going to be coming up. If I face this way, the stars are going to be coming around in a circle there. So I know that if I stand somewhere around here, the North Star is going to be right above this rock formation here. So that's going to look really cool with the stars coming around in a circle right there. So that's it's a neat app on your phone. Of course, if you just have a compass and face north, you can just try your luck at getting the North Star in the frame. So I'm going to pick up my camera again. We'll talk about gear in a few minutes, but what I'm going to do first of all is just try to find myself a good composition. And I'm just going to take a shot with this camera and see if I like it, see about where I have to stand to get the composition that I want, and also considering the height of my tripod. And sometimes I just make a little mark on the ground. I see there's a piece of rusty tin here, so I'm just going to kind of kick it over to where my spot is so I can find it again tonight. All right, so my plan is to come back here at twilight. And what I'm going to do is set up my tripod and everything while I can still see, get my composition all set up, and then I'm going to focus on these foreground elements and get a nice twilight shot. I really like twilight, so I'm probably going to use the twilight shot anyway, but that gives me a chance to get all of the detail in the rocks and in these cholla cactus, and I can use that photograph later to brush in some detail if I want to on the star trail image. But I'm going to come back at twilight, get that all set up and get it ready to go, and that way when I'm walking out here in the dark, I won't have to try to find my composition and do all of those things that are really hard to do in the dark. When I do come back and it's dark, the first thing I'm going to do is take that same exact photo that I took at twilight when I have my focus on these foreground elements to make sure I get one shot with those things sharp. Then I'll take my focus and change it to focus on the stars, because if your stars are slightly out of focus, you're going to get blurry star trails and it doesn't look good. So you have to focus on the stars, and when you do that, the foreground's going to be blurry, especially if you use a wide aperture, which you're going to need to do at night. So we're going to come out here at night, take a long exposure with the foreground sharp, change our focus to focus on the stars, and then set up the star trail sequence. Okay, so let's go back to the RV and we'll talk about the gear, and then we can talk about the settings and the plan for the star trail sequence. Okay, so we'll start with the camera. This is all the gear here that I'm going to use. So you can use any camera to do this. One thing that is the difference between cameras is that some come with an intervalometer built in and some do not. So an intervalometer is like a cable release that you can program, and you can say take a shot that's 20 seconds long and do that every 23 seconds or whatever the interval that you decide. You can program that. So I'm using an old Sony a6000, and it has an app in it that's a time-lapse app, and I just use that. It's essentially an intervalometer. So you need that. For the lens, you're going to want to use a wide-angle lens, and that will allow you to get a lot of sky into your composition, because you need quite a lot of space, especially if you want the stars going around in a circle. So you want your foreground to be a third of the frame at most and allow lots of space for the stars. So you want a wide-angle lens. You want to use a very wide aperture, because at night you're going to be using long exposures, which means you'll have a lot of noise. You're going to have to use a very high ISO. There's going to be a lot of noise. So if you have a lens that's a fast lens, an f2.8, that is ideal. An f4 will do, but it's better to use a 2.8 lens. That'll allow you to use a lower aperture number, a wider aperture, and gather as much light as you possibly can. So I'm using, this is a 16mm pancake lens. This lens has lots of bad reviews online, but I love it. It is great for night photography. Yeah, I love this lens. I use it all the time. So I have my tripod, of course, usual thing, nothing special there. Now this is a dummy battery. So there's a couple of different ways you can go about this, but this is how I do it. The little Sony batteries do not last very long. If I try to do this on the battery, it will only last about an hour and this battery will be exhausted. So what I like to do is use this power box. Is that the right term? I use this power box, and what I do is I can plug this dummy battery, just goes in here, and then I plug it into the power box, which has been charged up, and now I have all the power I want. I can go all night long and have this keep taking photos until I run out of space on the SD card. So that is my favorite way of setting up the star trails, so I know I'm not going to run out of power. Okay? About your settings. This is a bit experimental. You're going to have to try different things and just see how it works out. Sometimes it might take a few nights of trying to get it just right for wherever you are. But generally, you can start out at, say, around ISO 1600 or even 3200 for around 30 seconds. Try that first and see how it goes. It's going to be different in every location that you're at. I'm here in the southwest, and there are a lot of stars. The sky is very clear. There's no cities anywhere near here, and there are a ton of stars at night. I found when I first started doing this down here that when I put the star trails together, it was a complete whiteout in the sky, like just white. There were so many stars. So what I do down here is ISO 800 for 20 seconds. And I take a 20-second photograph every 21 seconds or 22 seconds, maybe, you know, just give it a little bit more every 22 seconds, say, and I'll do that for 2 hours. So like I say, you're going to have to experiment for your location. If you're in a city, you can do it in a city. It's just a different situation. So what I find is I'll take a first shot, because you also are going to want to make sure that the stars are sharp. So take a first shot, and you won't be able to see anything in your foreground. But if you can see any stars, you might just be able to see a couple of little tiny lights. That's enough. As long as you can see something, that's enough. When you build it all together, you'll get star trails. Just make sure that it isn't completely black. But as long as you can see some stars in your photograph, you're going to be able to build something with that. So it is a bit experimental. I wish I could give you a formula, but if you're starting out in a brand new location, that's the first time you've ever tried it, you know, go with ISO 3200 for 30 seconds and just see what you get. If you can see a lot, bring the ISO down, and just try to get the ISO relatively low if you can, and then you'll have less noise to deal with in the post-processing. Okay, so I think that's it. I'm going to come back out at twilight and set up, and then afterwards we'll look at the shots and do the post-processing. Hi guys. Okay, it's twilight now, so I'm back at my spot, and I've got the composition that I want, and what I'm going to do is just take my twilight shot now, and so I know at least I'll have that. If anything else goes wrong later, at least I'll have this twilight shot, and I'll be able to use some of these details to brush in to the star trail image later if I want. So I'm just going to go ahead now and make sure my composition is exactly the way I want it to be, because I won't touch my camera again after this except to change the focus. So I'm going to get this just right like that, and I'm going to go ahead, make sure I'm focused on the foreground, and I'll take the shot. Do you want to have a look at that? So, you know what, I think I'm going to tilt my camera up just a little bit more. Get rid of just a bit more of this, because these joys are kind of brown on the bottom. So I'm going to tilt this up a little bit more and make more room for stars. Okay, let's try that again. Alright, so now I'm just going to change my settings to what I'd like them to be at nighttime, and then I'm going to turn my camera off and come back later on. So let's see, I think I'm going to go ISO 400 because I can do a long exposure. I can even do 200 actually, because I'll do a long exposure tonight on my 2-second timer at f8, and I'm going to leave it at that. And when I come back, I'm going to do a long exposure, and then I'm going to start the star trails. So here we are back at the computer ready to do our post-processing. So last night I decided to leave the camera gear out all night, and so it took 4 hours worth of photos and stopped when the moon came up, and now I have 819 photos, including the few that I took before I began the time-lapse sequence. So you may be asking, why so many photos instead of just doing one long exposure? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that if you have a very long exposure and something happens in the middle of it, a car drives by and lights up the mountains or something, it ruins the whole thing. Whereas if you take a whole bunch of short ones, you can stack them, and that gives you an opportunity to remove any frames that might be ruined by a passing car or something like that. The other reason is that there can be problems with the sensor heating up and different things like that cause problems in a single long exposure. So I prefer to do mine this way. I take a lot of shorter exposures and then stack them, and I will show you how to do that. This one here is the beginning of my time-lapse sequence. Remember how I said if you can see any stars at all, you will have something to build with. And when you first see it, you know, if you look at the small one over here in the top left corner, that's about what you would see on the back of your camera, and it looks pretty black. But then when you bring it in, you can see that there are all kinds of little stars, and when you stack all these together, you'll definitely have something to build on. So I don't like to do a whole lot of processing at this point. Usually all I do, I'm going to go over to the Develop module, and I am simply going to go into Lens Correction, and I'm going to click this box for Remove Chromatic Aberration. And that will remove any pink lines around the stars that you sometimes get. So I'm going to click that. I'm not going to make any other changes right now because I can always come back and do this again if I want to change the white balance or if I want to change the clarity. Lots of times you will come into this basic panel here and increase the clarity so that you get more stars. But like I mentioned before, there's going to be a lot of stars down here in the southwest, and if anything, I might have to reduce this clarity later because there's too many stars. So I'm just going to leave it as it is for now. And what I'm going to do is go back to the library module, and this is the photo here that I made that one adjustment to, and I'm going to go down to the bottom of all of this, and I'm going to shift click so that all of the photos I want are selected, and I'm going to go sync settings. And everything I need in here is checked, and I'm going to click synchronize. And that will make sure that all of the photos have the same settings. Okay, and now I am going to export all of these photos. Now this takes a few minutes. Some people avoid this step by shooting in JPEG in the first place, but I prefer to shoot in RAW. I kind of figure that I'm not in this for it to be fast, I'm in it for quality, so I shoot in RAW, and that gives me an opportunity if I want to make changes to the RAW file, I can. So I'm going to export these now. I'll go File, Export, and I'm going to put these into my Pictures folder in a subfolder called Stars 1, and I'm just going to go Export. Okay, now that we've exported all of our photos, we're ready to stack them. And we're going to do that using a program called StarStax. This is a free program that is available, and you can get it for both Windows and Mac. Just search for StarStax with an X, and you will find it. So what I'm going to do is take the photos that I exported. I put them in my pictures folder called Stars 1, and I am going to select all of these and then drag them onto StarStax. Alright, so I'm just going to do the basic star trails first. There's a couple of really interesting options that we have in here. There's blend mode. I always choose lighten. You can choose gap filling, but honestly I can't tell the difference between lighten and gap filling when I've done it, so I just use lighten. And I'm just going to go ahead and click this button over here to start creating the stack. And as you can see, it's going to start building it. It's running through all the files here, and it's going to start building my star stack. Okay, so here is the final image, and lots of stars, lots of stars to work with here. All right, let's try something else back in StarStax. So I'll close this, go back to StarStax, and what I am going to try next is this comet mode. I really like the results of this comet mode, so I'm going to check comet mode. I'm going to move this over to long trails. And so I've got lighten, I've got comet mode, and I've got long trails. So let's give that a shot and see what happens. And there is the version with the comet mode. I really like this comet mode, that looks so cool. Alright, we're finished with StarStax now, so I put those files in the same folder as all of these, so I'm just going to import them into Lightroom now, just to keep everything neat and tidy in the same place. Pictures, time-lapse, and all of these photos are already in, so I'm going to scroll down here, and these are the two I'm interested in importing. Okay, so let's have a look at these. This is the one that's in comet mode, and that is the one called lighten. So what are we going to do now? Well, you could stop at this point. If you want to, you could just leave this as the silhouette. I really like the silhouette of the foreground. You can leave it that way. Or you can choose to brush in some details like we did before. We took the photo at twilight and we took a painted photo, a light painted photo at nighttime. We could use one of those two to brush in some details if we want to. You can go ahead and process this some more in Lightroom or in Photoshop or in Luminar or whatever you want to do. So this is just the stack, and we can move on from here, or we can call it done at this point. So I think what I am going to do is look at brushing some of those foreground details into this photo. Alright, so we're going to open these up in Photoshop. Before we go ahead with that, I actually went ahead and reprocessed the one with the comet mode. This is the one that we were looking at before, and I wanted to bring out a little bit more stars in this, so I went back to the original files, added a little bit of clarity, and exported them again, ran them through StarStax, and I got this version here. This version's a little bit too much, but I'll be able to dial this back a little bit. It doesn't work out quite the same way if you just try to add clarity to the one that's already stacked. So I just ran through that process again and got this image right here. So let's go ahead and open up these two images as layers in Photoshop by going Photo, Edit in, Open as layers in Photoshop. Alright, there they are. I'm going to drag the Star Trail image one to the top of the stack, and we'll work on that one first. And now I'm going to go back to Lightroom and grab my twilight shot. There it is there. I'll make my Lightroom window a little smaller so I can just drag and drop this over into Photoshop. And by the way, that only works if you're doing a JPEG or TIFF file. People always ask me about this. You can't drag and drop a raw file like this. If it's a raw file, you have to go Photo, Edit in Photoshop. But if it's a JPEG or a TIFF or something like that, you can drag and drop it onto the file you're already in. Alright, so now what we want to do is mask out the sky so we can see through this layer into the star trails below it. So I am going to go select Sky. Alright, now I'm going to select the inverse, so I have everything but the sky, and then I'm going to click the layer mask icon. And now we have all of the foreground from the twilight image and the background from the star trails. Now it's not quite perfect. We have a little bit of fiddling around to do here. When we zoom in, you'll be able to see that the foreground isn't lining up perfectly. So my tripod may have sunk into the sand a little bit, or something happened here. I didn't touch it in between twilight and doing the star trails, but this happens a fair bit where it's not perfect. So I need to look at some of these other edges. It's not too bad on the other side. But what I'm going to do is just stretch this foreground a little bit. All right, so let's go back out here. And I'm going to hold my Shift key and just try to stretch this up, and I think it's not going to let me. Oh no, it did. I'm going to stretch this. I thought it might not let me because it's a smart object, but it worked. So I'm going to stretch this up a little bit. And then another thing you can try to get the foreground just right is using the warp tool. Okay, so I'm going to go transform. I'm going to go Command T to get transform, right click and click warp. Now it's not going to let me because it's a smart object. Alright, so I will remove the smart objectness from this layer by clicking on that layer there, and layer, smart object, and I am going to convert to layers. Okay, so now it's just a regular layer. So now I will be able to go transform, right click, warp. All right, and now it's going to let me warp this. So that means I can take portions of it and move it one way and move the other portion another way, and you can really play around with it and make sure that everything is covered the way you want it to be. So I'm going to just click here and drag this part over a little bit like that, but I don't want to mess up the other side, so now I'll go over to the other side and bring that cactus back over so it's covering up the background. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna zoom in a little bit again, and right here I could maybe make that a little bit bigger. Okay. And that is looking pretty good. Maybe a tiny bit more here. Pull one side and it moves the opposite side. But that's what you have to do. You just have to play around with it a little bit until you get all of these things covered the way you want them. And then I'm going to click the checkbox at the top saying, yep, to accept those transformations. And now you'll notice on the right hand side, because I warped this, there's a blank area here. So you can either crop that out if you want. That might be the easiest way to go. Or you could use the remove tool. You can add a layer, use the remove tool, and just paint over this and it should fill that in. Yeah, so we'll go down here like this and you can just kind of fix that edge using the remove tool. Okay, yeah, that worked great. So let's just go in again and inspect these edges. This is the thing you really have to do, is inspect these edges and make sure that everything is just the way you want it to be. All right, I think that looks good. So I'll zoom back out and hold down the space key and move this over so I can see it better. All right. So now it doesn't look great, okay, because obviously this twilight part was taken during twilight and it doesn't look right against a night shot. So we have to do something here to make it look better, you know, like it was at night. So you have a few options. You can reduce the opacity of this layer, but I don't think that's going to work out quite well because of the way we warped it. So the background is going to start showing through. I'll show you what I mean. I reduce the opacity and you can see those edges again. So I think what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to combine this layer, and I'll name this one actually remove edge, so I remember what that layer is about. And I'm going to put these two in a folder so that I can manipulate them together. And I'll call this folder foreground. Okay. And so now I can add an adjustment, and I'm just going to go brightness contrast, and I'm just going to lower the brightness of it. Okay, see that? So that now it looks a bit more realistic, right? You can go down as far as you want. Notice how it's darkening the stars too, and we don't want that. So I'm going to clip this adjustment layer to my foreground folder by clicking down the option button, and you see the little arrow that comes up in between these two layers. I'll click there. And now this brightness layer is only affecting the foreground group and not any of the other layers. Okay, so I'll turn that brightness off and on. And I'll turn the whole foreground off and on. All right, I think that looks pretty good. I think I might take the brightness down a little bit more. There we go. And now if we want to see what that looks like against the comet mode one, I can simply turn off this layer of the star trail, and there is our comet mode in the background. Now this one looks overboard to me, so I want to add an adjustment layer above this one. And let me see, what kind of adjustment do I want to do? I think I'm going to go with hue saturation, and I'm just going to take down the saturation a bit and see if that gives me, yeah, that looks better. There was just a bit too much blue, so I'm going to take the saturation layer off and back on. Yeah, that looks better to me. All right, this is looking good. So now let's turn the star trail layer back on. The very last step that I'm going to do here will be to fix this plane went by right through the middle of my star trails, but that's okay. We can fix that. I'm going to add a blank layer, use my remove tool, and I'm going to zoom in. Let's go over here. Make my brush a bit smaller, and I'm just going to go ahead and start getting rid of all of these little dots. Now, you can try to, make a great big line like that. Well, it actually works pretty good, but sometimes it doesn't. So I often find myself going and just doing little bits. So you can try and doing a big long line and see what happens. See if that messes up any of my stars or not. Yeah, and it did a little bit. You see right in here? There's a funny little glitch. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and take my time and do these one at a time. And get rid of all of these dots. I'll get rid of any other little dots that I see, like that, and do this throughout the whole image. Okay, so I finished going through and cloning out all those little dots I didn't like, so I can turn this layer off, and you can see that plane, that line there again. There's a few other little spots here and there throughout, and I will turn on my cloning layer again, and now all of that has disappeared and everything is smooth and nice. So I'm going to now turn off these two layers, and I'll go ahead and do the same thing on this version with the comet mode. Alright, and here is the final version with all of those little spots cloned out. So now we have our version here with the comet mode and another version with the star trail mode. Oh, there we go. There's the version with the star trail mode. Okay, in the next video, I am going to be showing you how to use this exact same set of images to make a time-lapse video and a time-lapse with the comet mode, which is super cool. So stay tuned for part 2, and we'll work on the time-lapse. So thank you very much for joining me. There is a lot more to learn, but I hope that all of this gives you a place to start in making your own star trail photographs. Okay, thanks again for watching. Bye for now.